Welcome. My name is Leona, and on behalf of everyone here at Better Read Than Dead, we are so excited to see you on Zoom to celebrate Sofie Laguna's newest book, Infinite Splendours. Please note that tonight's event is being recorded, so if you would not like to be filmed, please turn off your camera settings. Proceedings, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. These will be different depending on where you're zooming in from. For me, it's the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It is upon their ancestral lands that Better Read Than Dead is. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Before we get started, please note there will be a Q&A session towards the end of tonight's event, and you can type any questions you may have for Sofie and they'll answer them via video once the time comes. Tonight, Sofie Laguna will be in conversation with Nicole Abadee, an absolute literary powerhouse. Nicole is a book writer, festival moderator, podcaster, and literary consultant. In addition to being the books writer for the Australian Financial Review, Sofie also writes about books for Good Weekend and the Australian Book Review, and is a facilitator at writers' festivals and other literary events. Nicole is also the host of the highly acclaimed literary podcast, Books, 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 and will be a judge at the 2021 New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards for the Christina Stead Prize for Fiction. Without further ado, I'll throw it to Nicole to introduce Sofie.
Thank you so much, Leona, for that beautiful introduction. It's wonderful to be here tonight. I'd prefer to be there in the room with all of you in person, but virtually is the next best thing. Before we begin, I too would like to acknowledge the country where I live and work, and from where I'm joining this conversation, the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, to the elders of all communities and cultures across Australia, and to leaders of the future. It's an absolute delight to be here in conversation tonight with the wonderful Sofie Laguna. She doesn't need much of an introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyway. She started life studying law. She then worked for some years as an actor, and then she became a writer. She started writing books for children, which have been hugely successful and have been widely published overseas. Then, in 2008, she published her first book for adults, One Foot Wrong. Her second adult novel, The Eye of the Sheep, won the 2015 Miles Franklin Literary Award, and her third, The Choke, won the 2018 Indie Book Award for Fiction. Both books were shortlisted for various other awards, including the prestigious International Dublin Impact Award. Sofie says that she decided to make writing a career after she saw the movie Thelma and Louise in 1992. Sofie, it's a pleasure to be in conversation with you.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for that generous introduction too.
Now, I have to start by asking, why did seeing Thelma and Louise, one of my own all-time favourite movies, in 1992, make you want to be a writer?
I did not expect you to say that. You've caught me by surprise. No, it was one of those, I suppose it was one of those moments that contribute to the way things have unfolded. Only in that I do remember seeing that film, and I had a strong reaction to that film. I really enjoyed it, like so many others, but I do remember thinking maybe for the first time, somebody wrote that script, somebody wrote the story. And I found that a really exciting idea. I remember now, I noted who the writer was. Of course, I'm going to go blank, even though I've kept up with her career all the way through. But of course, now that I need it right in this moment, it's disappeared. But I was aware that she had written it and that the whole film had followed from her writerly, imaginings. That's where it began.
Sofie, in each of your 4 adult novels, you write, or it's written in the form of a first-person narrative by a child, which is utterly convincing. You are known for this, for recreating, for capturing the voices of young people so beautifully. How do you do that? How do you capture that voice in such an authentic way?
Well, it's interesting, because as you say, I'm known for it. It's nothing I didn't have an overarching I don't have an overarching rationale to this. It's just, it comes naturally. And perhaps perhaps a cheeky answer might be, I remember my sister saying to me once, Sophie, you are so 5. I mean, that's one way.
How old were you then?
Like 45. But that's one way to answer it, isn't it? I mean, I'm being playful, but that's one way to answer it. There is no how for me. If I had to think of how, I would never be able to do it. I suppose I'm just doing what comes most naturally. I never intended for it to be this way, and I really hope that Lawrence, as a man in his 50s, is as authentic as he is when he is 10. And certainly, you know, when I was at acting school, I had a number of opportunities to play children, and I played children as an actor and a performer for many years, but I played older characters too, and I hope I can I hope I can embody them also.
Do you think you've drawn on your acting in your writing too? I had read about that you'd done a lot of fairy parties and appeared as a lot of children in your acting days.
I have.
Do you draw on your acting in that way, do you think, to create these incredibly real, authentic characters?
I don't know if I'm drawing on my acting days, but I guess that same person who loves character and inhabits character also acted, you know. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? I'm not sure. I mean, everything, all of my life experience hopefully is contributing to making these characters live, I hope.
So tonight, obviously, we're here to talk about Infinite Splendours, your 4th adult novel, published by Allen and Unwin. It opens in 1953 in a small country town called Hewlin in the Southern Grampians in Victoria. How important is that setting to your novel, and why did you choose that particular area?
Well, it became really important as the story developed. You know, I always worry, Nicole, that my answers are not going to sound sophisticated enough, honestly, because I had, you know, the book before Infinite Splendours was set on a river, the Murray River, and I wanted somewhere different, and I decided I needed a mountain. And I'm not from Victoria, so I'm not familiar with Victoria's mountain ranges. I'd heard for many years about the Grampians, that people would take their holidays in the Grampians or they'd go walking there, although, you know, it wasn't in my own childhood. And I simply Googled Grampians. Where is it? Can I reach it? You know, will I be allowed to leave the kids? Is it close enough for me to leave the kids? Are there hotels near these mystical mountains? So, you know, I discovered, okay, I could reach the Grampians in say 3 hours. I borrowed a friend's hiking boots and hiking socks, threw them in the back of the car, and set Hall's Gap into the GPS. And also,
sorry.
No, well, I was, you know, the name Hall's Gap's pretty interesting, and Hall's Gap wasn't quite right. I arrived there, and the town didn't feel quite right, because all of these decisions are very intuitive. But I remember that very first afternoon, I climbed Mount William, and it was a deeply impressive experience, and the story was already beginning to sort of form. And so in those early stages, when I'm getting to know characters and choosing setting, the experience is very what's the word, euphoric, you know, because I'm caught up in this story, and then the beauty of this mountain begins to feed the story and my imagination. I'm invariably alone, and it'll be the first time I would have been able to get away from the demands of my domestic life. So all the ingredients are right for euphoria.
I'm going to be asking you in a minute.
Yeah.
We're going to start by talking about the Lyman family, but then we are going to come to talk about a particular mountain that features in this story and why it was so important for you to pick somewhere that had a mountain like that. Let's start first of all with the family at the centre of this book. So in the opening chapters, we meet them, the Lyman family. They're very close-knit. There's Lawrence, who's 10, who becomes the main character of your book, his younger brother Paul, who is 8, and their mother Louise. this is set, as I said, in 1953, and we learn that their father died during the war, at the time that Louise was pregnant with Paul and when Lawrence was only 2. I'd like to talk, or for you to talk a little bit first about Lawrence. When we first meet him, what is he like? What sort of a little boy is he?
Well, I really like, Nicole, I want to say the way you describe them as close-knit. Yeah, I mean, that hasn't been said before, and that's true. And I really did want to establish that. They are very close-knit. They're really bonded, the 3 of them. Lawrence is sensitive. He's fun-loving. He's confident. He enjoys school. He enjoys home. When I say sensitive, he's intuitive. You know, he can pick up on things that aren't necessarily spoken about his mother. He's protective. He's protective of his mother and of his brother. He's aware that he's growing up. Of course, he's aware he's growing up without a father, and that his mother's very brave. He admires her because she works. And I think it bonds him more intensely with that mountain, where the mountain, Mount Wallace, behind them.
What's he like at school, Sophie?
He's good at school. He's really good at school. He's the first to put up his hand. He engages with the subjects. He's fortunate enough to have teachers who are committed to his learning. And Mrs. St. Clair introduces him to painting. And she gives every child an easel, and she has some imagination herself, and she says, look to the window and paint what you see. And Lawrence experiences for the first time what it is to leave his own, how do you put it, to sort of transcend ordinary thought and enter the painting. That's what it is like. Time stops.
And that becomes his favourite subject, doesn't it? He really loves his art. He looks forward to Friday mornings. And she picks him out as a gifted child. She gives him a sketchbook and some pencils, and she says, you have a real gift for this. You should stay with it.
Yeah. And she has enough life experience or imagination or whatever it is, yes, to see it. He is gifted, and from that moment on, he describes it, doesn't he, as living a double life. He sees the ordinary world, and he sees how it might be in paint. And he sees opportunities for painting everywhere he looks.
And let's talk about his, oh, sorry, Sophie.
All right, that's all right. It's tricky. The room is tricky. And it seems I've got more to say than I realised.
Well, that's wonderful. Everybody wants to hear from you, not from me. So
and you're asking me things I haven't been asked about, and it's exciting, to think about them.
Tell me about Paul, the younger brother. He's 2 years younger. Is he academic like his brother?
So he is less academic. He's cheeky. He has a great sense of humour, and I really enjoyed that about him. They would bounce off each other. They were rude. They were fun. There was some rivalry, but greater than their rivalry was their love and their loyalty. He's athletic and mischievous. Yeah.
And when we meet these boys, we have a very strong sense in those opening chapters of, I think I've heard people say idyllic, certainly that this is a very happy family. There's no father there, and that's obviously sad, but they're getting on with things. The boys are having a very normal, happy life. They play hide and seek.
I would agree.
There's a gap in the wall between them in their bedrooms. They talk to each other at night. So we set the scene for a very happy, contented family, and for boys living a very happy childhood. There's one more character we haven't talked about that I wanted to come back to, and that is Wallace the Mountain. Lawrence refers to throughout as he. Tell us about Lawrence and how, tell us about Wallace and how Lawrence feels about him.
Well, interestingly, the decision to make Wallace a he is something that I didn't make any intellectual decision about. I just would have been writing the story, enjoying the story, and Wallace would have appeared on the page as a he. And if that fits for me, and clearly it did, then I will work with that and develop it. I think the mountain partly is a kind of a father figure for Lawrence. But the mountain is also a boat at different times, a sail, a kind of custodian of the land, God, I think the mountain, sometimes I think the mountain is God. I never say that, but it's occurred to me lately for Lawrence. You know, Lawrence describes he walks his pathways, he spends time with his trees and his animals. Yeah, Lawrence is besotted with Wallace and loves to paint him. He's really, he loves to paint him.
Let's go to Louise then, the boy's mother. What sort of a mother is she? What's her relationship like with her sons?
Devoted. She takes their schoolwork very seriously. Somewhat aloof. The boys experience her, especially Lawrence, as if she lives at one end of a bridge that can never be crossed, and it pains him. They wait for her touch. They're hungry for those intimate, tender moments. She's consistent. She's loving in her way, patient mostly. But Lawrence can feel there are ghosts, is that the word, in her past that she doesn't speak of. And he's curious. At the age of 10, he becomes curious, understandably, about what hasn't been said. He picks up on all of that. She has a job. She does the numbers at the local dairy. She's a reliable worker. She did the training herself. And Lawrence also can see that. That's Louise.
There's a lovely line at one point where he says, even if mother was close, she kept a part back, and that was the part we wanted. I think that goes with what you're saying about her just holding herself just beyond reach. They don't quite get from her everything that they want.
That's it. And that I hint at explanations for that lie in Louise's past.
Yes.
Some pain around intimacy that prevents that from happening.
Now, I should say to everybody listening to this, there's a little bit of dancing around the topic here, or there's about to be, because one of the many fabulous things about this book is that it's full of revelations. And so we want to be very careful tonight not to create or to give away any spoilers that will spoil the story. So bear with me as I dance around the topic a little bit. What I want to say now, Sophie, is that all of that pretty much takes us, the novel's divided into 3 parts. And all of that pretty much is part 1, set in 1953 when Lawrence is 10. At the end of part 1, something terrible happens to Lawrence and he changes overnight. I want to ask you now about how he changes. So in part 2, we see him from the age of 10 through to 25. In the immediate aftermath of this terrible thing that happens to him, he describes how he feels. He says, I felt myself dividing. There were 2 selves to choose from, one inside, one outside. He says at another stage, I was separate from school, from learning, and from myself. What does he mean, Sophie? How does he change?
Well, he's no longer, it's as if a part of him has left his own body. It's too painful to be there. He feels separated from his mother and his brother. So he was bonded with them before, and it's as if there's something, there's a wedge has been put between him and them. I think he's damaged, and that damage prevents intimacy. In the same way, interestingly, there's an echo there, isn't there, between, it just occurs to me now, with Louise being at the end of a bridge. Something has happened that has shattered his sense of self. And just being present, he's detached or cut off.
So let's look at in those early days. As I say, in this second part, we see him go from 10 to 25. In those early days, when he's still at school, he was, we remember, a very enthusiastic little boy, the first to put his hand up, knew all the answers, loved going to school. How does he deal with school now?
Well, he's in the room. He can see that he's in the room. He can see the other desks. He can see the other kids. He can see the blackboard, but there's no connection between him and those objects. So it's as if trance is not the right word, but he's just separate. He's separate. He's caught. He's lost somewhere. I mean, you know, when this really happens, that's the privilege or the space that writing fiction allows us, isn't it? You know, it's a construct. He's able to articulate this process of being split and being separate, and there being various selves, and he has that awareness. But that's the luxury of fiction, and that's what makes it so exciting. I can find words for this state that it's rare to be able to, you know, find words for being this way. But he has an element of self-awareness. I can't remember now your question about that.
No, you've answered it.
Yeah.
That
he's carrying shame that he didn't have, and it makes all the ordinary business of life quite excruciating.
And that shows with him, there's both physical and mental manifestations of that. The mental manifestations we see in the sort of descriptions that he's given that we talked about earlier. I was separate from everybody.
Yeah.
One very marked physical manifestation, which is obvious. He was a very articulate little boy. What happens after this event takes place?
He has difficulty speaking. So he's unwell, you know, in the crisis, he becomes quite unwell. And when he emerges from that illness, if you like, he has a stammer. And it's worse in school, but it's there around his family. And it functions, I think, on a couple of levels. So at the same time as it prevents him from communicating easily with others, it is also for him a form of protection, as contradictory as that sounds. Keeping those words back, keeping him separate, is one way of attempting a boundary, I suppose. That was my understanding of how this stammer functioned for him. So he is uncomfortable around other people, but his inner life, there is much going on. There is still much going on. That painter is still in there. And he says he doesn't lift the brush at that time, but he still continues to see the world, to see the opportunities for painting. Yeah, he describes painting as travelling along a road towards a destination that will never be reached. And he still sees those roads there before him, but he is cut off from the desire to paint.
And Sophie, the portrait that you paint of the trauma that he suffers, the physical manifestation, the mental manifestation, is a very rich, complex, convincing portrait. One of the teachers says at one stage, to him or to his mother, I think, it's like he's just come back from the war. So I'm guessing what you're saying is it's as if he's got, which post-traumatic stress syndrome. I wondered, did you research that? What sort of research did you do that enabled you to understand so well how a childhood trauma like that would manifest itself first on a child? We'll come later to talk about an adult.
I think it's just the same way anyone who is listening to the media now and reading and being aware of what's been coming out. I remember watching a documentary by a filmmaker. So there's nothing specific I have for you here. There are little sparks where I watched a young boy tell his story of something similar to what happens in my story, and maybe that's a seed, and it was so unbearable and so terrible that maybe a part of me needs to visit it and know it. Maybe it heals it somehow. Maybe it makes it feel better to at least have lived it with him and be true to that. And that's a very difficult thing for me to find the words to make sense of. But to hear him tell it after the fact, and then to find, to want to turn away from it is just, I struggle to find the right words. Maybe all I can come up with is maybe it's a healing to actually be brave enough to go there. Yes, damn it, to be brave enough to have to endure it and be in the truth of it is better than having some person describe it after the fact as their life falls to pieces. It's unbearable. It's unbearable, but yet something, I'm not doing a great job of describing it because it's strong stuff, I suppose. So, it's all unconscious. It's, my desire to write the story comes from a place that I don't analyze or fully understand. I'm just doing it because it's there and asking to be done. But, research is all around, isn't it, in 2020, building up inside of me, I suppose. Then comes the urge to do something about it. What can I do? I suppose this is the best I can do.
So he limps through the rest of his school years, this little boy who was getting brilliant reports, who was the smartest kid in the class. He gets through school and then he doesn't know what's going to happen. His mum, when he's 19, his mum gets him a job at the dairy where she works, as you say, doing the accounts.
Yeah.
How does he get on there out in the world away from school? How does he get on with the other men that he works with?
I'm glad you've asked me because I haven't had an opportunity yet to speak about the dairy, and I love the dairy.
Well, I know you know how to milk. I've read somewhere that there's something we haven't talked about, which is the cow, who plays a very important role in this book.
She does.
And I read that you, Sophie, learned how to milk cows at a young age and were very good at it.
Yeah, because we grew up on a converted dairy farm. Yeah, from the age of 11, we moved to a dairy farm, and we had a cow lady, and I was the family cow milker. So, Lawrence is resistant to having to leave the borders of home and Mount Wallace. He feels very safe there, and his lovely neighbour, Mrs. Barry, and the yard and the house, Beverly. The house is Beverly, and he's another kind of character in the story. Yes. And he's resistant, but he can see his mother's anxiety for him, and he wants to do it for her. He knows how important it is for her, so he braves it, and unexpectedly he's pretty good at it, and he's very soothed by the routine around it, by getting up at 4 a.m. for the first milk and being taken in Bill Granger's car to the dairy. He loves the cattle. They wait for him there every morning. He says that the day begins in the eyes of the cattle. I like that those first sparks of light in the cattle's eyes as they wait for him at the gate. They're very familiar to him, and he sings to them and he milks them. And the other men mostly leave him alone. And Alan, one of the supervisors, gives him words of encouragement, and he enjoys the ritual. And that's right, he begins the first day working at the dairy. That very first day when he returns home, he climbs the mountain, and he hasn't climbed the mountain in many years. And it's it's a kind of ecstasy for him. And he reaches the top of the mountain and he looks out over the world and he says, I can do it. I can do it. I can get to that dairy each day. I can milk, and then I can climb the mountain and be here and sit in that silence. And I remember the first time I heard that silence was the first time I climbed Mount William, and I hadn't encountered a silence like it, looking from the peak of that mountain out onto the world. And that's how it was for Lawrence. So the dairy was a pretty good place.
So he works there until when he's 24, his mother dies. And after her funeral, there's a very powerful scene when we see he goes back to the house, he goes back to Beverly. Paul at this stage is older. He leaves the home. His mum's no longer in the home. He's in the home by himself. He's lost Mrs. Barry also, the beautiful next door neighbour that we haven't talked about, but who he had a lovely rapport with.
Yeah.
And he's pretty miserable. And what we see him doing in that scene is horrifically looking at the beam in the kitchen ceiling, thinking, and we then see him deliberately going out to the shed to fetch rope and a stool. And we have him saying, all hope is gone. So it's pretty clear what he's contemplating. But then he sees something. He sees a scene that almost transfixes him, and that makes him change direction. Could you describe what he saw?
Yeah, he's on his way to the shed, isn't he, to get the stool, the milking stool, which is another kind of a symbol through the story. And he sees a crested pigeon in the apple tree. The apple tree is also another symbol through the story.
Mm.
And there's a beautiful purple and a gold in the wing of the crested pigeon and the jaunty crest above his head. And the pigeon leaves the bough of the apple tree and flies toward Mount Wallace, and as if he's drawing Lawrence's gaze to the mountain. And Lawrence turns to the mountain, and it's as if the mountain says to Wallace, "It's up to you, paint me." Yeah, that's what Lawrence sees and hears, as if there is something that only you can do. There is something that only you can do for me, and it's up to you to do it.
And there's a lovely line at that point. You have Lawrence's going through this thought process, and he says, there was something hidden inside Wallace, something only I could reveal.
Yeah.
And so what he does is he goes and he paints Wallace. So it seems to me from that point, we have a very clear message that it's almost like the combination of the two, Wallace and painting, literally really save his life at that point. And he goes home after he's painted that day, and he pulls out a book he was given as a child called Letters from the Masters. Could you tell us a little bit about that book? And I do have to ask, is it a real book? I couldn't find it.
It's a real book. It's a real book. Not exactly the same book, but a version of. There are a couple of collections of letters between 19th century painters.
Tell us about
I have one of them. I have one of them, and I've had it for years and loved it for years. What could be more inspiring than a collection of these real letters between painters as they struggled with their work and their families and their finances? And but it's so exciting, you know, as I'm speaking, as you're speaking to me about that moment, I'm remembering as he walked home from that first painting that he does after there's been that, you know, separateness from painting. He returns to it and he walks home, and he's almost in a daze, isn't he? He's ecstatic. Yeah. And there are fewer questions in his mind after that. There's a lot of the stress is dissipated, and he notices everything around him in crystal clear detail, and it's absolutely beautiful. And even everything in his home and nature around him, he sees still lives in every object. Everything tastes different. Yeah, the world is suddenly enormous, and he sees as if, I mean, it's beautiful for him.
And they really nourish him, those letters. There's something he then gets, as the book progresses, he orders paints, he starts to paint more. And then we have him saying, I read one of those letters every night. And he says, every letter in the book was written to me. I was not alone. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about that feeling of comfort that he got from those letters?
So it's the only book that I refer to in the house, and he was given it many, many years ago, and it's always had enormous significance on his shelf. He's always been aware of exactly where it is, but he hasn't opened it, and he opens it again, and there are these riches. And there are as many paintings or more paintings in the book than letters. And so at the same time as reading these intimate words between artists and their wives, and artists and their bankers and friends, he looks at the paintings. He's completely inspired. And the letters, they're very descriptive, and they're emotive, and they're very wordy, and they describe whole other worlds, Parisian worlds, worlds so far from his own, you know, small dominion there. And it's tremendously exciting, and he's wide open and hungry to learn. And his life changes, and they're reassuring, and they're company. Yes, I suppose for a man who has such difficulty connecting in the real world, there is those letters are even more loaded, and the paintings are even more exciting. And we can't forget that this is a really talented painter. So all of that imagination and scope and power is there in that individual. I mean, it has been, is the word, thwarted, but it is there. This is who this man is. So if you give a man made of that, with that much depth, and he's a really intelligent man who has been cut off from everything, or from so much, and then that one book, well, it's just like an explosion. And he's ready. He's whatever it is he 24? He's ready. He's ready to see, and he's ready to paint, and he's ready to read. So it's a rich experience.
We really get that sense then. We move into part 3, at which point he's 51, and we see that this is the life that he's created for himself. It's a life of some solitude, but he surrounds himself with his painting. And there are 2 other things that that he draws comfort from as well by this state. Well, he talks about the paintings. He sees them as family. They shield him from the world outside. So it's this concept of the paintings as being protection. There's something else he develops a passion for, and that's music. Not just any music. It's the music for the opera, Madame Butterfly. Tell us a little bit about that, and the way, the impact that has on him, and how he feels about that piece of music and why it becomes so significant to him.
It was great fun to play with Madame Butterfly, the wonderful Italian lyrics, and their just tremendous fun stitching those lines into the story where I needed them. Early on, as I was developing this character, I had him listening to Madame Butterfly. So the idea wasn't again, you know, an intellectual decision. I was playing with the character and writing him in a kind of dramatic monologue, and he listened to Madame Butterfly and flew to the stars with those, with the music. And so I thought, how can he have it? How can he have Madame Butterfly? How can I have it in my story? And I thought, well, it could be referred to in this book of letters. How convenient. So again, you know, such freedoms in the life of a fiction writer. And so I created a letter where Madame Butterfly is referred to, and I read about this opera. And so he asks his brother, and he hears it for the first time, and it's another life-changing moment. And then he absolutely insists on hearing it. And he plays it and plays it and plays it. So it becomes like a soundtrack or a backdrop to his work, to his painting. Occasionally he'll drink beer in the evenings and listen to Madame Butterfly and drift over the work that he's done during the day. So it's quite beautiful for him. So even though, you know, he has made a life for himself.
And although it's a life of solitude, our sense is that it is still a beautiful life. And for him, it's a beautiful life. And there's a lovely...
I'm glad you say that. I'm so glad you see that, and so glad you say that, because I think it is a beautiful life. And you know, sometimes I feel defensive on his behalf because, and understandably, you know, different readers will bring a different interpretation to the story. And yes, there is that trauma that's there, but I like to, I mean, really, the rest of the story, a great deal of the story is about Lawrence's recording of light, learning about light, seeing light, and understanding light, quite literally. And so to be in that world for me as a writer was really light and a very beautiful place, and perhaps made all the more beautiful for that which was lost, or in contrast to the darkness. So I was always happy to be there.
There's something that Lawrence says about Madame Butterfly when he's explaining it to somebody and why he likes it so much. And he explains that it's a very sad story, but he says there is beauty in sadness. And it seems to me that that was something that could really be said about this book of yours. Your writing is at its peak. I think the writing is absolutely beautiful. It's a very sad story in so many ways. But it seemed to me that that expression, that there is beauty in sadness, could be just as easily said about the book as he says it about Madame Butterfly.
I didn't even realise it. I didn't even realize it, but you are so right. That is obviously, oops, see, I've been caught out. Not caught out, but yeah, you're right.
That's what you've created, Sophie. Now I think I'm going to sneak in one final question, and then I'm sure there's lots of people who want to ask you questions. My final question is this. You once said, when you were asked why you write, I write for justice and for the pleasure that comes from creating music with words. We've just talked about creating the music with words. And then in 2015, after you won the Miles Franklin for Eye of the Sheep, you said something a bit similar. You said, it's so hard that children come into the world so innocent and have to find a way to survive when life can be so unfair. Maybe I am trying to right wrongs with these young voices. So that concept of writing for justice, of righting wrongs, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Well, can I respond by saying, I remember Margaret Atwood was asked, she said, when I'm asked, why do I write? She said she could come up with a different answer every single day of her life. I like that, because I could too. So, you know, even as you're saying all of those things, I can hear their contradictions. At the very same time, you know, at the very same time, I could say, as superficial as it sounds, I write for pleasure. I write because I want to. I don't ask at all why. I mean, I can say that I, in theory, you know, I want to right wrongs, but certainly that's not what puts me on the chair, or that's not what pushes the pen, not on a conscious level. I like playing. I like making things up. I love characters. I like dressing up and being somebody else, or I always did. I like make-believe. I like words. I like the juice in words. And I like dangerous. I like danger in fiction. In fiction. And I like being without rules. I like freedom, because I really struggle, you know, real life is not the same as that, you know? Yeah, I struggle. And there's great freedom in fiction. And I like there are certain truths I really want to put words to. And there's a great release. There's a great release in the feeling of doing it. And it's calming. I'm
going to sneak in one more question, because we don't have quite as many here as I thought we did. Yeah. The one thing that's different, we haven't talked about this specifically, but all of your adult novels deal to some extent with childhood trauma, with children who have been abused or who somehow or other have been betrayed or let down by the adults who trust them. In each of your 3 previous books, we've only heard from the point of view of the child whilst they remain a child.
Yeah.
It seems that this one, you've gone into a whole new realm in that you've taken it to the next step. Because in this book, you talk about the impact of childhood trauma, not just on the child, but on the man that he becomes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, how did you enjoy that experience? Was it liberating? How did you enjoy that, as opposed to the previous books when you were just describing the impact of that trauma on the child as a child?
Well, I'm glad you asked me, because I enjoyed it a lot. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I began there with him as an adult. He was a different adult when we began. He was a different man. And as I got to know him, I just loved him more and more. I'm missing him at the moment, you know, because to have him, you know, in my life in that period of time that I wrote him was really calming. I know, it's how do I explain it? I don't know, but it was calming. It was really calming, and I feel like I'm missing him, because I feel like he's moved or something. You know, he's moved away in a good way. In a good way for him, he's moved. But it was thrilling. It was completely thrilling, and it was different, and it was an expansion of my. You know, I did go forward. You know, I loved his use of language, because at the same time as being damaged in some ways, he was really bright and wordy, and you know, I loved him for his failings. I loved writing his failings. It gives me, it's liberating. You know, the brother brought the wife around. The brother brought his young wife, his young pregnant wife around. He described that, and he just said, no, no. You know, he was pissed off and he was jealous. And the brother didn't come again with the wife, and he was quite insightful about how and why that played out. Yeah, and I love how these characters don't aim to please all the time. They're not charming or nice necessarily. They're deeply flawed, and I find that is just a great way to a place to be. That I'm struggling to find all the right words. I love them for that. I love them for that. You know, for his stammer and his crazy height, and his, you know, he was gangly. He took great, powerful strides up across the mountain. Very passionate man, and I loved his love of nature. He got quite caught up with the poetry of it all, you know, and I loved him for that. Like, I liked how one day he said he walked to the music of blowflies, the wings of blowflies. It was a symphony of wings or something or other.
That goes back to the sensitivity you talked about earlier, that he was a sensitive child. He remained a sensitive man.
Yeah, but he can be quite dramatic, can't he? You know, in his descriptions of nature and painting, and I did love that about him. I know that in a different world he might have been, well, he would have been really social and very probably quite a powerful man in the world. But I like to think that the power that he didn't get to enact in the world would have poured into those paintings. I think the paintings were all the richer for his deprivation. I think so.
Sophie, I've got a lovely comment here from someone about Gert, that his relationship with Gert the cow, we haven't talked about that. We've touched upon that.
Yeah.
That his mother milks Gert, and then she teaches him to, and then he goes to work at the dairy. And there's a lovely comment here that say that's a real moment of a connection, a place where he felt safe. Yeah. How brave you are, Sophie, to write of such heartbreaking experiences with such humanity. If anybody has any questions, we've got about 5 or 8 minutes left. If anyone has any questions they'd like to send in. I've got another one, Sophie. Luckily, I've got plenty up my sleeve. One that you touched on, and that's something oh, here we go. Somebody else has sent one. You don't need to hear from me again. Sophie, how necessary do you think it is to physically travel to and become familiar with a chosen novel setting? I'm thinking about future writing and travelling and the potential challenges with that. That's a very timely question from a writer.
Well, if I'm going to be absolutely truthful, I don't think it is absolutely necessary. It's terrific fun, and it's a wonderful thing to do, and of course it's inspiring, but I don't think it's necessary. Not really. If you needed to, if you were caught in a room that you could never leave, you could make it your own mountain. The trick it's not about reflecting reality. It's about making a world, and that's the author's imagination. It's lovely if a mountain can spark imagination, and it's great to go and have a short holiday, but no, it's all, I don't think you need to go anywhere. I've never said that before. I'm only thinking it right now. I mean, it's about, if I, in my own imagination, decided that the mountain was surrounded by pink flowers, and I saw those pink flowers every day in my imagination. I wrote about them every day so that they came alive to me. Then they come alive to the reader. That's what's working. It's not that I'm doing such a great job of describing the real Grampians. Anyone probably who went there would go, Sophie, you've got this so damn wrong. I mean, you know, I've never been great at facts. I mean, I do my best, but you know what I mean? It's about commitment to imagination, I think. So don't worry about time restrictions or getting there. That's what I think. God, I'm probably, you know, the next conversation we have, I might completely have to contradict myself. But this is what I'm thinking right now.
Sophie, I've got another question for you.
Mm-hmm.
I read a quote from you somewhere where you were saying that you were a mixture of optimism and of pessimism.
Gosh,
and Sorry?
So true.
I was wondering how that played out in your writing generally and in particular in this book. So here we have someone who's suffered enormous trauma.
It's a good question.
Of probably, I mean, it's very difficult to compare things, but each of the young protagonists in each of your 4 adult novels has suffered or been exposed to some childhood trauma. But I think I would have to say this one is probably at the highest degree.
Do you think so? That's interesting.
Perhaps I shouldn't say that. We shouldn't measure them, but let's talk about that concept of how the optimism and pessimism in your personality comes through in your writing.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, I have a range of different responses to different aspects of the question. Different aspects of the question. I think really, if you look at each of the books, and I could only do this in hindsight, certainly when I'm just doing what I need to do for reasons I don't even ask the reasons, but if, really they are all about a push, they are all an insistence towards the light, all of them. So if you wanted to analyze it, I suppose that's what they're about. But I look at these things maybe differently. It's constantly fed back to me that they are about trauma, but it's my belief that every child knows trauma. Mm-hmm. It's my belief that being born is traumatic. Mm-hmm. Entry into the world, is there anything more? I mean, that's pretty traumatic. I mean, it's very essence, what happens to us. And from there on it goes. And you were saying all of the stories, your protagonists are let down by the adults, but isn't that the definition of? Isn't that what happens to us all in different ways? So I push it to extremes, but it's clearer in extremis, and the function of art is clearer in extreme.
Sorry, I have another question from the audience or from the listeners. You write for justice, but do you think there is any transcendent aspect to justice, whether religious, political, or just in art?
Yes, I think I do think that. I mean, I might not be fully understanding your question. Transcendence in justice. I think I understand it. I mean, definitely we can transcend. There are moments of transcendence in art, and he experiences them, and all things are made just in those moments. And I don't think everyone gets to experience them. So my take, and it's not going to be anyone else's, I don't think, is that he's blessed in about 1,000 ways, and he lives a long, rich life. Now, no one's going to think that, are they? That's what I think. But maybe it's my passionate relationship too with solitude. And I'm hungry for solitude. I understand he has too much, but many don't make it. Many people who suffer, what he did, won't make it so far and won't leave such a huge contribution behind that will go on to, in my imagination, you can see, that will go on to nourish whole generations of Australians and people from all over the world. See, I think I'm being crazy, aren't I?
That's the optimism.
Yeah, but if you live with me, it'll be you'd see me as you'd have to deal with my pessimism. It's not as much fun. Yeah, isn't it fun? Yeah.
I think that sounds like a pretty good place to wrap up, unless I can't see any more questions, unless anybody has any more questions. Sofie, it's been an absolute delight speaking with you. Good luck promoting this beautiful Transcendent is a lovely, lovely description. Good luck with promoting this wonderful Transcendent book. Now somebody says here, you should know this. Thanks for all involved in making tonight happen. So looking forward to this read. Sofie's beautifully written, haunting novels are a wonderful, immersive experience. That seems a perfect time for us to say goodbye and to throw back to you, Leona. And thank you so much for having both of us and all of you here tonight.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for your wonderful questions and your reading of the novel. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
been a delight speaking
Thank
with
you,
you.
everyone, for coming. Thank you. Thank you, Leona from Better Read Than Dead too.
Thank you so much. It's been such an amazing talk. This is such a beautiful book. Like, look for everything that we just discussed, and you should definitely read it. Congratulations, Sophie. Thank you so much, Nicole. It's been a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, everyone.
Thanks for coming,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you.